It's time for Security Now. Guess who won the most epic fail award? We'll talk about that. A backdoor found in RFID access keycards that are used almost everywhere. And then this is a propeller hat episode. We're going to have a lot of fun. Steve is going to explain a really clever technique that may solve this certificate revocation problem. We're going to study cascading bloom filters. And it's fascinating, but that's all coming up next on Security Now.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is Security Now with Steve Gibson, episode 989, recorded Tuesday, August 27th, 2024. Cascading bloom filters. It's time for Security Now, your favorite show every week, every Tuesday. We wait all week for this moment to talk and listen to Mr. Stephen Tiberius Gibson. There he is. Hello, Steve.
Oh, Leo.
Uh-oh.
I've taken a deep breath because, boy, do we have a brain-melting podcast today.
Oh, no.
But in a good way. We're going, this is, we've also referred to them previously as our Propeller Beanie podcasts, the deep dive podcast. And it's one of the things that our listeners keep saying that they really like.
Oh, yeah.
As much or more than anything else.
Absolutely.
The problem is there just isn't always something like that to talk about, but we have something today. For Security Now episode 989, for this last podcast of August. Where did that month go?
Yeah.
Titled Cascading Bloom Filters. And although this is going to be, this is like one of those podcasts where if you are operating heavy equipment, keep your focus on the heavy equipment because that's more important. But then listen to the podcast some other time because no one will be able to split their attention and come away feeling like, wow, I understood that. Because it's, and I don't mean to overplay its complexity. It's not, but it's brand new. It's pure, beautiful, intellectual computer science. And I know that a bunch of our listeners are going to get a big kick out of it. But we have other stuff to talk about first. Although I should say that our overall page count is down because I'm quite sure that our listeners' brains are going to saturate before, by the time we get to page 16. So I don't think anybody will find anything missing here. CrowdStrike's president appeared in person to accept the Most Epic Fail Award. We'll talk about that. Also, this is something that I wanted to talk about for a couple of weeks, and I just didn't have a chance to get it into the last couple of podcasts, but it upsets my stomach because a Chinese backdoor was discovered in Chinese-made RFID access key cards. And what this portends about our supply chain is really worrisome. We've got counterfeit and poorly functioning Cisco brand networking gear that were being sold to pretty much the who's who. I wanted to share a startling customer bit of feedback about his SSD performance improvement, and I've got screenshots which he took and sent. Also, a little bit of errata. When is Bing actually Edge? And another couple things. Also, another national public data breach check service, which is different than the one we talked about last week. And in this instance, more is better. And then for the second entire half of the podcast, we're going to answer the question, what are cascading bloom filters? And why am I talking about them? Well,
it has nothing to do with gardening, I'm assuming, yes?
Nothing to do with gardening, no.
Okay.
Why do they offer the promise of 100% browser local and instantaneous certificate revocation detection?
Wow.
This is what Mozilla has been working on for 4 years. And if people pay attention, everyone will be able to go, I understand about cascading bloom filters, and boy, will you be the hit at the next cocktail party.
It's a great way, I think, to meet people. Say, hey, have I told you about cascading bloom filters? And then they go, oh, no, but please do.
Yeah, well, or if it's really someone obnoxious who you do not want to talk about, you can just launch into a cascading bloom filter
there you go.
Dissertation, and they'll say, oh, I'm sorry, I have to pee or something. I mean, they'll come up with some, is that my doorbell? I think it's my doorbell. Hold on. Yeah.
We asked AI Leo in our Discord what cascading bloom filters mean. And I don't know if his answer is right, because I don't know what it is. But according to AI Leo, there's a term that can make even the most seasoned programmer's eyes glaze over faster than a donut at a cop convention. It's a nifty way to test whether an element is a member of a set. Is that right?
Yeah.
And cascading them is like stacking pancakes. Great for efficiency, but a bit messy if you don't manage your syrup. It was good so far, right up to that point.
That's right. Now, is it on one of your shows that you were talking about printing pancakes? Is the pancake printer?
Yes. That was we thought that was something that Craig Newmark owned at home, but because he took so many pictures of it on his Instagram, but it turns out he just is in a lot of airport lounges. And
but he pre-syrups the plate that the pancakes drop onto.
His technique.
So, as Craig always does, he's an innovator. He's leading the pack. And I should mention that, Leo, we have a really good picture of the week. This one is going to be fun when we get to it. I haven't
seen it, but I do have it all queued up for you.
Everybody should be ready for a lot of fun for the next hour and a half or so.
Okay, Steve. That will be the topic of the day in just a little. But first, a word from our sponsor, the great folks at Thinks Canary, something everybody should have. If you have a network, you I'm sure have excellent perimeter control. You protect your network from people entering it. But what happens if somebody's in your network? If they got through, or maybe a malicious insider wandering around? How do you know if you've got intruders? Right? Your perimeter safety, your firewalls, they're not going to tell you anything. You need a Thinks Canary. What is a Thinks Canary? It's a honeypot. It's easy to deploy. You can get it set up in minutes. And then if somebody is in your network accessing the Thinks Canary, which, by the way, is posing as a SCADA device or an IIS server or a Linux box. In my case, it's a Synology NAS. And when I say posing, it is a very credible pose. They even duplicate the MAC address. They've got the real login screen. It looks just like the real thing. But as soon as the bad guy accesses it, you're going to get an alert, and only the alerts that matter, right? No false alerts. They also allow you to make, the Thinks Canaries allow you to make what they call lure files, little PDFs or docx files or Excel spreadsheets. You can name them whatever you want. They look valuable. I have a, for instance, employee information.xls file. If somebody opens it, boom, immediately your Thinks Canary will tell you have a problem. No false alerts, just the alerts that matter. So how does this work? You choose a profile for your Thinks Canary from their console. There are literally dozens of things it can be. You register it with the hosted console for monitoring and notifications. And by the way, you can choose notifications in almost any way. Of course, text messages, phone calls, emails, syslog. It supports webhooks. It's got an API. So really, the sky's the limit. But the key is you're only going to get notifications when somebody tries to brute force your server, tries to get into your SSH server, or maybe opens one of those lure files. So you just wait. And an attacker who breaks your network, a malicious insider, any adversary will make themselves known immediately by accessing your Thinks Canary. This is a must-have tool. On average, companies don't know they've been breached. And we know this because we hear about these breaches all the time, months after the fact, right? On average, it takes 91 days for a company to figure out, hey, we've been breached. Now, you want some Thinks Canaries? I know you do. Here's what you do. You go to canary.tools/twit. For $7,500 a year, you get 5 Thinks Canaries. Now, you might want hundreds. Many big operations have many hundreds A small operation like ours might only have a handful, but just as an example, 5 Thinks Canaries, $7,500 a year. Of course, that includes the hosted console, all upgrades, all support, all maintenance for that whole year. And if you use the code TWiT in the How Did You Hear About Us box, you're going to get 10% off the price, not just for the first year, but for as long as you're a customer, for life. Here's another thing that will reassure you, because I know this maybe is new technology to some of you. Get it, because you can always return your Thinks Canaries. They have a 2-month, 60-day money-back guarantee for a full refund. So there's zero risk involved. I should point out, though, that there maybe you're going to fall in love with your Thinks Canary. During all the years that TWiT has partnered with Thinks Canary, that refund has never been claimed. Nobody's ever asked for their money back because it works so well. Visit canary.tools/TWiT. Enter the code TWiT in the How Did You Hear About Us box. The Thinkst Canary. Canary.tools/TWiT. We thank them so much for their support of Steve Gibson and Security Now. There is Steve once again. Steve, I have the picture of the week for you.
And we're ready for your candid first look, Leo.
Okay, that's a candid first laugh because I wasn't on camera, but absolutely, this is a winner. Let me pull it up for you.
So we're aware of the bragging signs that factory floors sometimes have, where they say, no accidents for the last 263 days, right? And they've got like little pegs where every day somebody changes the number, and they're really impressed with how they're doing. And I couldn't remember what it was, but we had something similar once where it was a smoke detector stuck on the ceiling, and it said change by or something, and it meant the idea was you were or installed by or something, and you were supposed to put the date in there, right. And somebody put something completely non sequitur in there instead. Anyway, so here we have, thanks to one of our listeners, a wonderful some signage. It says, "This work center has been accident-free since." And then there's a big white field where, someone's meant to be putting in the date, right? It's been accident-free since some date. And instead, it says, "This work center has been accident-free since Joe left."
Poor Joe. Poor Joe.
Yeah. And I did get a listener. I've already sent out 8,747 pieces of mail with the summary of the show, this picture of the week, the link to the show notes, and so forth to those listeners of ours who have signed up to receive that every Tuesday morning. Someone wrote back and he said, "Is that on the White House?" Anyway, Joe has not left the building yet, at least not in body. Anyway, just I'd love that since Joe left, right? Okay, so PC Magazine's piece was published on August 12th to set the time, which was 2 weeks ago yesterday. But I felt that it was important enough to share, and we've had our hands so full with, over the top 2+ hour podcasts the last few weeks. Elaine always tells me, she says, "Oh, it's going to take a while to transcribe." It's like, "Okay, Elaine, no problem. Take your time." Anyway, I just didn't have a chance to get to this, but I wanted to share it because I thought it was very cool. PC Mag wrote, "CrowdStrike's reputation has taken a beating after last month's massive IT outage. But rather than duck the ridicule, the cybersecurity company decided to own the mistake this past weekend," so that was 2 weeks ago, "by accepting a Cybersecurity Humiliation Award for Most Epic Fail. At the DEF CON Hacking Show, the annual Pony Awards recognize achievements and major blunders in the cybersecurity industry. Past winners," and it has that in air quotes, "of the most epic fail include Microsoft, the TSA, and Twitter. This year, there was no question that CrowdStrike would receive the notorious title after the company accidentally distributed a faulty security update that bricked millions of Windows PCs and servers. Although CrowdStrike could have easily ignored the award, CrowdStrike's president, Michael Santanas, accepted it in person, which elicited applause from an audience made up of other cybersecurity professionals. Santonis said it was important he accept the award so that CrowdStrike could own its mistakes. Quote, he said, definitely not the award to be proud of receiving. I think the team was surprised when I said straight away that I would come and get it because we got this horribly wrong. We've said that a number of different times, and it's super important to own it. He said he will prominently display the trophy. I wonder what the trophy looks like. Like a garbage can or who knows. Anyway, he will prominently display the trophy he received at CrowdStrike's headquarters in Texas, quote, because I want every CrowdStriker who comes to work to see it. Our goal is to protect people, and we got this wrong. I want to make sure everyone understands these things cannot happen. And that's what this community is about. Anyway, so the article finishes saying the gesture received praise from other cybersecurity workers since it's rare for a company to accept the Most Epic Fail award from the ponies. Still, CrowdStrike faces a long road to repair its reputation. A pair of class action lawsuits have already been filed against the company, demanding it pay damages for causing last month's outage. In addition, Delta Airlines, which was forced to cancel thousands of flights due to the disruption, is also considering a lawsuit against CrowdStrike and Microsoft, which we talked about before. Anyway, I just thought it was so cool that CrowdStrike's president went to the trouble and had the class to show up in person, and also that the attendees of DEF CON had the good sense to applaud his in-person appearance. So, lots of damage caused, and, him doing this in no way influences lawsuits that are pending and class actions and all the rigmarole and hubbub that will result. But still, as a gesture of, okay, we did this, and we're really sorry. I thought that was nice. Okay, so I talked about at the top of the show a piece of news that upset my stomach. I hit it early last week, but again, last week's podcast was already overflowing, so I didn't have a chance to share it. But I think everyone needs to hear this. The news has had some coverage in the tech press, but Catalin Simpanu's Risky Business newsletter had the most comprehensive coverage I've seen. So here's what Catalin wrote. He said a security researcher has discovered secret hardware backdoors in RFID key cards manufactured by a major Chinese company. The backdoors can allow threat actors to clone affected smart cards within minutes, actually quicker than that, and access secure areas. They impact smart cards manufactured by Chinese company Shanghai Fundan Microelectronics that were built using MyFair classic chips from NXP. And NXP is Philips' new name. The chips have been on the market since 1994 and have been widely used over the past decades to create smart key cards and access badges for hotels, banks, government buildings, factories, and many other places. Catalin then has a snippet in his reporting of a tweet from Rob Joyce, who notes, for those who don't know, these are the RF key cards that are used in the electronic locks for hotels and other businesses. This backdoor allows trivial reading and duplication of the key card for those that had the backdoor key. So Catalin continues, the chips have been on the market since 1994 and have been widely used over the past decades to create these smart key cards. Again, hotels, banks, government buildings, factories, and even the military has these. Because they've been on the market for so long, they've not escaped the prying eyes of the cybersecurity community, which has previously found several ways to break their encryption and clone Mirage-based cards with attacks named dark side, nested authentication, hard nested, and static nested attacks. You get the sense that there's something about nesting in the weakness of these cards. Over the years, vendors have developed improved versions of their smart cards that shipped with various improvements designed to boost security and prevent some of the discovered attacks. Two of the most popular, and these are the upgraded card designs, are the FM11 RF08 and the FM11 RF08S, where the S stands for Security Improved Version. But in a paper published last week, and so this would be a few weeks ago from now, Quarks Labs' Philippe Twen says that while researching FM11 RF08S cards, the improved ones, he found what proved to be a secret backdoor baked inside Fudan's cards. He discovered the backdoor while fuzzing the card's command sets and noticed that the card was answering to undocumented instructions within a specific range. He said, quote, apparently all FM11 RF08S implement a backdoor authentication command with a unique key for the entire production, and we broke it. For the Fudan FM11 RF08S cards, that key was it's a hex code, A396EFA4E24F. That's the backdoor that opens up any of those cards. Then taking his research further, he also found a similar universal backdoor authentication key for its predecessor, the FM11 RF08 cards. That key is A31667A8CEC1. This also impacted many other Fudan card models, and then we get a list of numbers. It also impacted card models from Infineon and Philips, now NXP, suggesting that these companies had likely licensed their card technology from the Chinese company. According to Twen, the backdoor, the researcher who found this, the backdoor seems to go as far back as 2007, meaning that many access key cards distributed over the past 17 years can be cloned with brief physical access within seconds. As it was pointed out above, these RF access cards are based on MyFair Classic, which were already considered insecure, but that was due to design errors and not a backdoor. Attackers would still have to spend minutes and physical resources to crack and dump a card's data in order to clone access keys configured to it, but the backdoor makes that possible, and it adds a whole new threat matrix cell. So what I find upsetting about this is that this is an example of the true danger we face when we're outsourcing and importing proprietary microelectronics that cannot be readily audited. And this is an example, I believe, that's crucially important because this is not just a theoretical attack, right? A theoretical attack is bad enough. Like, the fact that it would be possible to install extra chips on a motherboard to establish a secret backdoor for a theoretical attacker. But there's nothing theoretical about what was just found. This backdoor capability was actually secretly installed into countless supposedly secure and supposedly even more secure, like, their successor, enhanced security RFID access cards. So this wasn't a mistake. This was deliberate. And we're never going to know the deeper backstory here. We'll never know exactly why this was done, from how high up in Chinese industry or government the decision was made to subvert an extremely popular family of authentication chip technology, and why. And it doesn't really matter. What matters is that someone said, "We'll make super secure chips for you super cheap," and they were trusted not to design in backdoor access, which they did design in. So, we can see how Apple is being so, and why Apple is being so incredibly circumspect about the servers that they'll be installing into their data centers. We were talking about this after their announcement. At the time, that seemed like some really cool, over-the-top security precautions. Now it seems not only prescient, but quite necessary. We really do have a problem with supply chain security, and the only way it's ever going to get better will be when some means is made to thoroughly audit the design and operation of the technologies we use. The problem is that the extreme benefit of the level of integration that we have today buries literally the circuit diagram, the logic diagram of this technology under layers of silicon and masks and etching and everything that goes into building chips. Older chips, and we've seen this before, it's possible to pop the lid off the chip and take a photomicrograph of it, and semiconductor designers are able to understand from the horizontal and vertical stripes running back and forth that are like, oh, that's a transistor, and that transistor is connected to this one, and they can unravel that back into an actual circuit diagram. We've seen it done with like the 6502 and the 8088 and early generation ICs. But now that they've gotten to be multi-layer and deep, and in some cases deliberately obfuscated, it's possible to hide this stuff. It's just not feasible anymore. So I don't know what we do, but what we've seen happening over the 19 years so far of this podcast is all of the use of the internet and our technologies moving rather rapidly from, cat videos on the internet to be utterly dependent upon this networking technology for financial and military and governmental security. And it's coming up wanting, unfortunately. And on a related topic, we have Bleeping Computer recently carrying a piece with the headline, "CEO charged with sale of counterfeit Cisco devices to government and health orgs." They wrote, Honor Aksoy, the CEO of a group of dozens of companies, was indicted for allegedly selling more than $100 million worth of counterfeit Cisco network equipment to customers worldwide, including health, military, and government organizations. According to the criminal complaint, the 38-year-old Florida man ran a massive operation between at least as early as 2013 through 2022, importing tens of thousands of modified, low-quality networking devices for as much as 95 to 98% off of Cisco's MSRP for the same devices these were purported to be, from Hong Kong and Chinese counterfeiters through a network of at least 19 firms in New Jersey and Florida. The indictment alleges these devices were sold as new and genuine Cisco products through dozens of Amazon and eBay storefronts to customers across the United States and overseas, some ending up on the networks of hospitals, schools, government, and military organizations. The fraudulent Cisco devices sold by pro network entities came with performance, functionality, and safety issues that led to failures and malfunctions, which in turn generated significant damages to customers and operations and networks. This happened because the counterfeiters who sold the fraudulent Cisco equipment to Axoy were modifying older, lower model products, some previously owned, to make them look like genuine models of new and more expensive Cisco devices. A U.S. Department of Justice press release reads, quote, "As alleged, the Chinese counterfeiters often pirated Cisco software and unauthorized, low-quality or unreliable components, including components to circumvent technological measures added by Cisco to the software to check for software license compliance and to authenticate the hardware. Finally, to make the devices appear new, genuine, high quality, and factory sealed by Cisco, the Chinese counterfeiters allegedly added counterfeited Cisco labels, stickers, boxes, documentation, packaging, and other materials." In other words, total front-to-back, soup-to-nuts counterfeiting of the entire unboxing and, receiving experience. Bleeping Computer said, Axoy's companies, collectively known as pro-network entities, generated more than $100 million in revenue, with millions lining the defendant's pockets. However, despite his efforts to fly under the radar by using fake delivery addresses, submitting forged paperwork, and breaking shipments into smaller parcels, between 2014 and 2022, Customs and Border Protection agents seized roughly 180 loads of counterfeit Cisco equipment shipped to the pro-network entities by co-conspirators in China and Hong Kong. In July of 2021, law enforcement agencies seized 1,156 counterfeit Cisco devices worth over $7 million after executing a search warrant at Axoy's warehouse. To top it all off, DOJ says that between 2014 and 2019, Cisco sent 7 letters to Axoy asking him to please cease and desist his trafficking of counterfeit goods. Axoy allegedly responded to at least 2 of Cisco's cease and desist letters by, quote, causing his attorney to provide Cisco with forged documents. So, he was trying to play the game too. And, Cisco would have seen this equipment on sale at Amazon and eBay and probably bought some of it and opened it up. There was a squirrel in a cage inside instead of, an actual multi-core processor capable of doing what their product alleged it could do. And of course, this hurts Cisco's reputation a lot in addition to just lost revenue. So the defendant was arrested in Miami on June 29th, 2 years ago, 2022, and was also charged in the District of New Jersey the same day with multiple counts of trafficking counterfeit goods and committing mail and wire fraud. If the charges stand up in court and Axoy gets sentenced to prove the truth of the allegations, this serves to show how easy it could be to infiltrate critical networks if a threat actor uses a similar approach, selling genuine but backdoored networking equipment. And again, this makes us think that Apple was not in any way over the top to be, taking the lid off of their servers, doing high resolution photography to identify the authenticity and provenance of every single component on their servers, like as the beginning of the process that they go through before they let one of these servers get plugged into their super secure data center. So it's very clear that the bad guys have figured out that we're implicitly trusting the supply chain every step of the way. And unfortunately, there are a great many steps along the way. We know that security requires that every step be secure because it only takes the subversion of one step to break the security of the entire chain. And unfortunately, the way we are doing things at the moment, we're vulnerable to that. Okay, so Leo, at this point, let's take a break for our next sponsor. And then I want to share some sort of amazing performance improvement news courtesy of a SpinRite listener.
All right, we'll get right back to Security Now in just a moment, Steve. But first, a word from our sponsor for this segment, this portion of the show, 1Password. Actually, this is such a great, happy story. 1Password, which has been around for a long time, I know a lot of you use it as your password manager, acquired another one of our sponsors, Collide. Must be almost a year ago now. Collide specialized in enlisting your end users to help you maintain security. In addition to the authentication part, what Collide did was authenticate the devices and the software the user was bringing in. So the user was authenticated and then the devices and software were authenticated. Well, of course, 1Password has the first part of that equation. They said they were brilliant. Oh, what if we marry the two and 1Password Extended Access Management was born? I'll tell you why you need it. Let me ask you a question. Do your end users always work on company-owned devices and IT-approved apps? I don't think so. So how do you keep your company safe, especially your data, when it's out there, that data sitting on all those unmanaged apps and devices, the BYOD phones, the laptops, the shadow IT? 1Password has an answer to this. 1Password Extended Access Management. It helps you secure every sign-in for every app on every device. It solves the problems traditional IAM and MDM can't touch. You don't need MDM. Imagine your company's security like the quad of a college campus. You got the nice brick paths leading from ivy-covered building to ivy-covered building. Those are the company-owned devices, the IT-approved apps, the managed employee identities. And then there are those, dirt paths worn by people who actually just go in the shortest distance between building A and building B. They're not going to go on the brick path. They're just going to cut across. Well, those are the unmanaged devices. Those are the shadow IT apps. Those are the non-employee identities like contractors. Most security tools work on the happy little brick paths, but of course, a lot of the security problems take place on the little dirt shortcuts. That's why you need 1Password Extended Access Management. It's the first security solution that brings all these unmanaged devices, all these apps and identities under your control. It assures that every user credential is strong and protected, every device is known and healthy, and every app is visible. It's security for the way we work today, now generally available to companies that use Okta for authentication, so it's a great add-on. It also, ever since the acquisition with 1Password, they've been expanding this. It now works with Microsoft Entra. It's in beta for Google Workspace customers, so if you use any of those authentication systems, you absolutely need to check out 1Password Extended Access Management. 1Password.com/security now. The number 1PASSWORD.com/security now. That's a wonderful marriage made in heaven. Thank you, 1Password, for supporting what Steve does here. Thank you for supporting us by going to that site, 1Password.com/security now. Now let's get back to Steve Gibson.
Okay, so this is from a listener of ours who identified himself as Sandor, and he said, thank you for SpinRite. He said, I have a 10-year-old Toshiba satellite laptop. I installed a Western Digital Blue SSD just over 5 years ago. And actually, he doesn't say it in here, but it's a 1 terabyte. So it's a 1 terabyte WD Blue SSD just over 5 years ago. He said the warranty just expired. This Windows laptop was acting sluggish. I could not immediately identify the issue. So I ran down the checklist of items, checked for updates, and ran check disk. No problems. Checked disk optimization. Barely any fragmentation. Checked the firmware on the SSD. It was up to date. Ran a quick smart check. Everything was okay. I pulled out SpinRite and ran level 1 and checked my system afterwards. The sluggishness was still there. And that's what we would expect, because level 1 is just a read pass. He said, thinking about what to check next, I remembered Steve mentioning SpinRite's benchmarking utility. Ran the benchmark, and the issue revealed itself. The front, middle, and end read speeds were way off. Get this, 2.489, 17.224, and 11.642, and those are all megabytes per second. So, wow, 2.489 megabytes per second. I think floppies do better than that. Anyway, he said, then he said, see benchmark before.jpg, and I've got that in the show notes. Then he said, ran SpinRite at level 3, and that's what he wants. He said, after level 3 completed, I reran the benchmarks, which showed how the SSD returned to its proper performance. So now remember, before we had 2.489, 17.224, and 11.642. Now, 564.353, 563.285, and 564.222. In other words, back to, from down at 2.5, 17, and 11 megabytes per second to 564 megabytes per second across the board. And he said, see benchmark after.jpg. He said, the sluggishness I noticed is gone. The satellite laptop is performing as I would expect for a 10-year-old system. And I've got, for anyone who's interested in the show notes, he took a picture with his smartphone of the benchmarking output results before and after. The other thing interesting is that SpinRite looks at the speed in the middle of the drive as the best estimate of the drive's average performance, and it uses that to guess at, to give the user a ballpark, estimate of how long a SpinRite scan will take. Due to the low performance in the middle of the drive before, SpinRite was estimating that 1 terabyte drive would take it about 17.72 hours to scan. Of course, that's what old SpinRite 6 users were accustomed to seeing from a 1 terabyte drive. Not so any longer. After he ran the level 3, SpinRite now estimates that it would be able to scan that 1 terabyte SSD in 32.6 minutes. So from 17.72 hours to 32.6 minutes. And of course, the entire drive's performance is restored to its original factory throughput. So, we are seeing more and more examples of this. Initially, when we first discovered this, we were shocked, but we know what's going on. It's that especially at the beginning of the drive where the OS files reside, they are almost exclusively read. And this SSD problem known as read disturb actually causes the storage levels in the bit cells to be disturbed, meaning altered, when neighboring regions are read. So the SSDs are extremely good about trying to get that difficult to read data back. They do all kinds of re-thresholding in order to set different threshold points for what are basically analog storage cells. They end up getting your data back, but at a huge cost in performance, simply by rewriting all the data, which SpinRite's level 3 does. All those the ones are really ones and the zeros are really zeros, and the drive comes back up to its factory original speed.
Just like me.
That's right. Glad to have you back at your factory original speed, Leo.
You know what happened? It's really hot here. It's almost 100 degrees, and I think Comcast just died. And fortunately, yesterday we put in Starlink, so I'm talking to you now via space.
Wait. You look perfectly synchronized.
It's amazing.
And low latency.
Starlink is fantastic.
It works?
Yeah. Latency is really low, in some cases lower than the terrestrial internet with Comcast, and it's enough bandwidth to do the show.
Wow.
So if you want to take a break now, you already took a break without me, I think.
I did.
Okay.
Yeah.
As you should have.
I created both sides of a standard break.
Okay.
And we will do another one here in at the beginning of our main content.
So continue on. And I apologize for
no problem.
Nobody saw that I had disappeared, but I had, and it was crazy. What was happening was coming back. So we have failover. The Ubiquity fails over to Starlink. So when Comcast dies, about 10 seconds later, I come back. And the way this works, I'm not originating the call. So you'll continue on without it. What happened was Comcast would drop, Starlink would come up, and then it would come back. Starlink would drop, and it was a mess. So I manually unplugged Comcast. And I might leave it that way. Anyway, continue on, my friend.
You know, Elon is such a challenge.
Yes.
But he does manage to induce people to create technology. It's
amazing.
He's like, what do you mean we can't have low Earth orbit satellites? I'm going to throw some up in the air myself.
Thousands of them up there, yeah.
Wow. Okay, so I have two pieces of errata to share. First, it's been brought to my attention that I've been referring to Microsoft's Edge web browser as Bing.
Understandably.
Completely is obviously their illustrious search engine facility. And I'll confess that the two have occupied approximately the same undesirable location in my head. So, yeah, they were confused. But now that I'm aware of this glitch, I will work to be more conscientious of my tendency to lump Edge in with Bing because, they're both 4 letters and they're both MSFT. Wow. Okay, the second issue was obvious in retrospect, but it just didn't occur to me last week, and that was that the National Public Data Breach Search Facility at pentesters.com requires the choice of a U.S. state. That's not something non-U.S. listeners who were likely affected by the breach, at least those in Canada and the U.K., would have. So everyone was saying, hey, Gibson, I'm in Canada. What state is that in the U.S.? Oh, yeah, that's
I might mention, though, that, and you know him well, Paul Holder, who is a Canadian.
He grabbed it.
A resident of both of our fine forums, did an interesting thing. Let me pull this up. He downloaded the data from the NPD breach.
Both of the monster files.
Yeah. And he wrote a little utility because he's a programmer that went through it. And he says he can't confirm there's anything in the database other than U.S. addresses. The bad guy said it was U.S., Canada, and the U.K.
That's true. So what Paul got, and we talked about this in detail when we went through what Troy Hunt had found. Troy did see evidence of pollution of the National Public Data breach data with other lists that had been lumped in.
Look at this: Calgary, Alberta, Canada, in the state of Texas. That's definitely corruption. Yeah. So it may well be that what Paul got was the good data from National Public Data, and that there was additional junk that was added in just to sort of salt it and make it look bulkier and more worrisome. Who knows? Anyway, you may not have missed anything if you're not in the U.S. Maybe you lucked out.
Very, very good point. That may not be anything that they're doing. So I got some feedback. Listener Mike wrote, he said, "Hi, Steve, just got off the pen test site after doing a name lookup. Yep, I'm there, but nothing very new. We froze our credit at 4 separate sites many years ago, and nothing is showing up since before that happened. We moved to our current house 10 years ago, and that address does not show up. Thought you might like to know." And then yesterday, listener Kevin White wrote, he said, "Hi, Steve, very long-time listener. If you count Tech TV, I think you and I and Leo go back before Security Now existed." And
that's
yes, that would be, because it was during a call for help episode, which you and I were filming in Toronto.
Yeah.
That you said, "What would you think about doing a weekly podcast on security?" And I said, "A what cast?"
Smartest move I ever made, Steve. I just got to say.
No, me too.
Good move.
This has been really good, Leo.
Yeah.
It still is. So he said, last week you gave us a link to the pen tester site's NPD breach check webpage. I just wanted to note that for those of us with a fairly common name, and he's Kevin White, pen tester's check page doesn't always give out complete information. Now, he masked his middle initial. He said, my name is fairly common, and pen tester's check page gave up listing similar names after first name, then middle initial B, and then last name. He said, for example, B being the middle initial. And my middle initial is located somewhere else. So initially, I thought that I wasn't on the breach list. Then I checked, now here's the key, the npdbreach.com site. A different site, npdbreach.com site, against my name and current zip code, and I confirmed I'm on the breach list. Then he said, sad face. The benefit to the pen tester site is that it appears to show you the full number of entries there are for you on the breach list, whereas the NPD breach site appears to just give you a somewhat distilled version of the results. He said, a single entry for all breach list items with the same social security number, I think. He says, so it's best to check both sites, especially if you have a common name or if you've lived in a bunch of different places. He said, checks against social security number, not by state. One colloquial data point. He said, a friend was on the list, but it did not have any recent addresses for him, nothing in the past 15 years. But his wife was on the list with their most current address. He finishes, I guess that's what's somewhat nice about these circumstances is that the breach list appears to have some data reliability weaknesses that might make it a little more difficult for someone to hijack an updated or recent account. Thanks, and see you tomorrow. And he wrote this yesterday, signed Kevin. So I wanted to make sure that everyone knew about the https://npdbreach.com website. It also appears to be safe and legitimate. They allow the NPD breached data to be retrieved by name and some address info, or by providing a full social security number or a full phone number. However, now that might seem dangerous, but the site explains that the user's provided social security number or phone number are blinded by hashing locally on the browser. They similarly hashed that same data at their end and then indexed their database with those hashes. That allows the user to retrieve their records with those hashes without the data that they're submitting to the site being exposed.
That's how Troy Hunt does password searches in Have I Been Pwned. Same thing.
Yeah, not that it makes that much difference anymore, since as we know, everything is now out there flapping on the internet.
Wow.
So, wow. Yeah. And I should mention that I did get a piece of email from someone, I think it was titled The 7 Circles of TransUnion Login Hell.
Oh, boy.
And I actually had the occasion to need to log into my TransUnion data last week. Boy, is that site broken. Oh, I mean, it's just so broken.
Yeah. No, it's my opinion that all of these sites, they don't want to give you credit freezes. So they make it, but they're legally required to. In fact, they're legally required to do it online. So they just make it broken.
Oh, yeah. I mean, every trick in the book in order to get logged in. And Lord knows, I know the tricks, but for someone who doesn't, it's like they're just going to say, they'll probably just give them a phone call and hope that they can talk to somebody.
Yeah. In fact, that's what I think it was. Experian, I had the same login issue. I showed it on Windows Weekly a few months ago. But then you call them, and I don't know why you wouldn't think they'd want to call. But
no, you would think that would be. But I tell you, that's what they're driving call traffic.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Okay, so this is from Darren in New South Wales, Australia. This was just a really nice note, and I wanted to share it for not for the flattery but that he gives to us, but for the perspective of a recent listener that I thought was valuable. He said, "Hi, Steve, longtime follower of GRC, short-time follower of Security Now. Early last year, right, 2023, I was looking for a new podcast when I stumbled across Security Now. Despite being a longtime GRC Steve Gibson follower from the late 90s and visiting your website a lot, particularly in the early days of firewalls for the obligatory Shields Up test on reinstall of Windows, for some reason, I never clicked on the Security Now link. When I came across the podcast last year, I saw your name and I thought to myself, this guy knows what he's talking about. I might have a listen." He said it was episode 909, How ESXi Fell, and I was hooked, he wrote. He said, "I spend quite a bit of time in the car, and I listen to the podcast. So I quickly caught up and was waiting for the podcast for next week when I remembered you and Leo speaking about the fact that GRC has all the previous podcasts available. And I thought, why not? So I downloaded episodes 1 through 100 and pressed play." He says, "What a different world it was back then, when you could afford the time to spend a number of weeks telling us how the internet works and how PKI works, as opposed to today, when it just seems like there's a never-ending collage of security disasters, vendor mistakes, and just plain carelessness. Additionally," he said, "I really liked the episodes on NetStat, that was number 49, and the history of virtualization, number 50. He said, as Leo mentioned recently, compiling your tutorial sessions into a consolidated package would be very valuable for the beginner, which is why I wish I'd come across your podcast back in the day, as I'm an RF engineer who somehow found myself in the murky world of IT, and I'm still wondering how that happened. The way you can explain a complex and sometimes abstract concept in simple and understandable terms is an enviable ability. At work, I have to frequently provide a translation service between engineering and operations, and I've used your examples and explanations a few times to great effect. So my routine is this. I will listen to episodes 1 to 10. Then I will listen to the current podcasts, usually 2 weeks' worth given the time it's taken me to listen to 10 episodes. Then I listen to episodes 11 through 20. Then the current ones I've missed, etc. I'm now up to episode 102. I'm wondering what my listening schedule will look like as your episodes get longer and longer over time. I'm thinking I may have to drop back to only 5 episodes from the before times before tuning back into the current podcasts. Otherwise, I'll be too out of date, and I don't want that to happen. I would recommend to all late comers to Security Now to go back to the start and revel in the glory that is Security Now. Wonder at how naive we were back then, and remember a time when a couple of gig of RAM was overkill and way too expensive. Congratulations on a fantastic podcast, a great website, and hopefully we can all be here listening to you and Leo describe the hopefully soft landing after the end of Unix time. Thanks and regards." Yep. Darren
great,
from
Darren.
New South Wales,
Thank
Australia.
you. That's awesome.
So I also wanted just to share this as an example of how different our feedback from email can be from the "here's a link" messaging through Twitter. Now, don't get me wrong. I know there's a place for both, but the nature of our feedback is now completely transformed from the way it was, and in a way that I think works for the podcast. And Darren's point about those older podcasts still being relevant really is true. Probably after we finally retire the podcast, Leo, I'll go back and pull together some tutorial retrospectives that what do they call those evergreens that, just continue to have value.
And until then, people can, of course, do it themselves at your site.
Yeah.
We also have, all the episodes at
and you've got the high quality
twit.tv/ASN.
ones, which is good.
And video for the ones that there were video for. It's a little tricky because you have to, kind of go back a page at a time. But I'll give you a little tip. The URLs, if you type twit.tv.
Our uniform?
Yeah, /SN and then a number, not with a 0, but just a number like SN1. That's the very first Security Now episode.
Oh.
So you can, and probably be easy enough to write a scraper to take advantage of that fact. There's Security Now or 2, and so you can also do it this way, one by one. But you are going back in time to the year 2005. Well, look at this one, Security Now 4. We just discovered passwords. That's very exciting.
What
I think
is
they'll be
a
useful.
password? What do you know?
Here's your personal password policy, part 2. You're probably talking about password haystacks. Or something
I do like alliteration, don't I?
Yes, you do. Keyboard snooping. Remember that? Bluetooth snarfing. And that what were they using? ROT 13 to encrypt the keyboards.
Yes.
Those were the days, my friend. We thought they'd never end.
Actually, it was a fixed XOR mask.
That's what it was.
XOR.
They were XORing.
It's
Crazy. Crazy with a fixed mask.
And on that note, we should do our third and second to the last sponsor, because I'll take a break here in the middle, and everybody, maybe some ice water against your forehead.
Because you want a propeller hat episode.
Your brain is going to heat up.
Guess what? You're going to get one.
Yeah, your brain. It's going to heat up. But I tell you, this is a new concept. There will be a new concept for many people. It is so friggin' cool. So
I'll make sure AI Leo listens.
And Leo, actually, I was thinking of you and your own coding of your problem solving annually. There's some value in this.
Oh yeah, this is what I do every December, the Advent of Code calendar. I'm stuck on day 22, I think, from last year, December 22nd. But every one of them is really about algorithms and using algorithms. Yeah. And so I always want.
This is a new algorithm. This is a very cool algorithm.
Can't wait. All right, we'll get to that in just a bit. Thank you, Mr. G. But first, a word from our sponsor, the fabulous Experts Exchange. Now, I know you listen to this show because Steve's an expert, right? And has great information. Wouldn't it be cool if there were a website where you could go and people like Steve would answer your specific questions? That's the whole point of Experts Exchange. I was a longtime member. I used Experts Exchange for years. Somehow lost track of him. I met him again a few months ago, and I was just saying, you guys are still around. This is fantastic, especially nowadays in a day of AI hallucination and misinformation. Experts Exchange is a network of humans, trustworthy, talented tech professionals, people like Steve, where you can get industry insights, you can get advice. This is people who are actually using the products in your stack instead of paying for expensive enterprise-level tech support that often, let's face it, leaves something to be desired. Get the answers from Experts Exchange. It's the tech community for people tired of the AI sellout. Experts Exchange is ready to help carry the fight for the future of human intelligence. With Experts Exchange, you get access to professionals in over 400 different fields. You got coding. In fact, I'm going to use it this December for Advent of Code. What was I thinking? Microsoft, AWS, DevOps, everything you'd need to know, even enterprise level issues with regard to governance and compliance. And unlike other places, you've probably gone to other sites where you get the snark, right? Oh, we've heard that question before. That's already been answered, that kind of thing. Unlike other places, Expert Exchange says duplicate questions are encouraged, and there are no dumb questions. In fact, the contributors at the Experts Exchange are tech junkies who love answering all questions. The reason this is, the secret, which I think is really important, is the people who have expertise. One of the real supreme rewards for attaining expertise, Steve's a perfect example, is how fulfilling it is to pass your knowledge on to help somebody else. That's why we do these shows. And the experts at Experts Exchange feel exactly the same. So they're not going to snark you. They're going to say, great question. Let me help you with that. One member said, there's a quote, direct quote, I've never had GPT stop and ask me a question before. That happens all the time on EE. EE is proudly committed to fostering a community where human collaboration is the key. Their expert directory, full of experts to help you find what you need, including, by the way, Steve, Rodney Barnhart, who's a big Security Now fan. He's a VMware V expert. People like Edward von Bilgen, who is an ethical hacker and a Microsoft MVP. He can give you lots of really useful information. There are Cisco design professionals. There are executive IT directors. They're just from every level of information. And that's exactly what you need. Other platforms, this is really important, betray their contributors. Look at Reddit and others by selling their content to train AI models. By the way, their content is your content. It's the stuff you put up there. Not at Experts Exchange. Your privacy, your information is not for sale. Experts Exchange stands against the betrayal of contributors worldwide. They have never and will never sell your data, your content, your likeness. They block and strictly prohibit AI companies from scraping content from their site. By the way, that is a challenge. That's a chore. You got to really constantly pay attention. Experts Exchange does that. They don't want them to steal your stuff to train their LLMs and make money on it. And the moderators strictly prohibit direct use of LLM content in their threads. So it is a place by humans for humans. That's why you're going to love Experts Exchange, because experts deserve a place where they can confidently share their knowledge without worrying about a corporation stealing it to increase shareholder value. And you deserve a safe haven from AI where you can get the answers you need. Experts Exchange. Now, this is the best part. They know there are people like me who have lapsed, right? Just kind of, they fell off my radar for some reason. So they're offering you now 90 days to try it. Absolutely free. No credit card required. It'll be up to you if after 90 days you say, yeah, I want to stick around. I think you will. But hey, why not try it for free for 3 months? e-e.com/twit. You can learn more at Experts Exchange. And that tells you something. They've been around for a while. They've got one of them very rare 3-letter.com domains. e-e.com/twit. We thank Experts Exchange so much for their support of Security Now and the good work, the important work that Steve is doing right now. All right, Steve.
Okay.
Part 1 of our subject of the hour, cascading something or other, bloom filters.
As I said at the top of the show, I am well aware that this podcast's enduring favored feature is pure and clean, theoretical deep tech explaining.
Woohoo.
And of course, Leo, you used to introduce me here as the explainer in chief.
Yes, I'll start that up again. I forgot about that.
I don't know that we're going to be able to do that all the time.
Right.
We were able to do far more of that back in the beginning, which, 19 years ago, before pretty much everything had been thoroughly explained, at least once, and in some cases multiple times. So, but I know that this is what people want. So I'm always on the lookout for something to come along that we have not yet explained. And it's the nature of those things to become increasingly rare, because by the end of the next hour, we will have done bloom filters. And we'll, if the topic ever comes up, we'll just point back to episode 989. So this week we have as pure and clean and deep and theoretical a topic of computer science as we've ever had, and I have to tell you, I'm excited about it too, because it's just so cool. And I just want to also say that I understand we have listeners who write to tell me that while they do very much enjoy the podcast and pick up useful tidbits every week, they only, by their own appraisal, feel that they understand around 5%, they often say, of what is sometimes discussed here.
And by the way, It's me.
No. Anyway,
I'm right in there with you, kids.
I'm feeling somewhat self-conscious that today's topic is likely to further reduce that percentage.
I'm going to try really hard, Steve.
Everybody's going to get it. But again, I saw an email from someone who says he listens to the podcast while swimming laps, and I'm just afraid he's going to drown because I don't know.
Sink or swim time, kids.
For me, and I know for a bunch of our nerdy listeners, there's nothing more gratifying than the moment when a new concept is grasped at and understood and becomes clear. So I predict that many of our listeners are going to find a lot of new ideas in what follows. So here it is. Today's topic is a technique in computer science known as a Bloom filter. It was so named back in 1970 after its inventor, Burton Howard Bloom. And just to get everyone warmed up here, I'll explain, and everyone's going to get it completely by the end. But a Bloom filter is an extremely clever and resource-efficient probabilistic data structure that's used to test whether an element is a member of a set.
Oh. Yeah, you do that a lot in computer science.
Yes.
That's a very common issue.
Is a revoked certificate a member of all certificates?
This would speed up OCSP.
It would probably be the answer to our dreams, which is where we're headed.
Nice.
Okay, so a probabilistic data structure that's used to test whether an element is a member of a set. But it's got some problems. Although false positive matches are a well-known and well-understood likelihood, so this thing can false positive, false negatives are impossible. They don't occur. So in other words, a test using a Bloom filter can return either a datum may be a member of the set, or this datum is definitely not a member of the set. Now, Bloom's invention is deliberately information lossy, which is where it obtains its efficiency. But as we'll see, this prevents members from being removed from the set, and as more members are added to a Bloom filter, the greater the probability of false positives becomes. So it's all of the math is understood, and it's all very cool, and so it's easy to optimize the Bloom filter for the things you want. Okay, so why in the world have I suddenly, apparently out of nowhere, decided to talk about Bloom filters? Where in our recent discussions might it be useful to efficiently know whether something, some item, might be a member of a set of other items? And I just gave that away earlier. Whether a website certificate might be a member of the set of all currently revoked and non-expired certificates. If we have a really large number of revoked certificates, and we now have web browsers reaching out to scores of other sites, all of the certificate authenticated TLS connections need to be checked. So we need to have some really fast and very efficient means for instantly determining whether any of the many TLS certificates the browser receives, even just reading one page, because as we know, pages now reach out to all kinds of different servers in order to construct themselves, whether any of those certificates have been revoked. And it just so happens that Burton Howard Bloom's 54-year-old invention from 1970 is the best way to do that today in 2024. One additional point is that today's podcast is not just titled Bloom Filters, it's titled Cascading Bloom Filters. The reason for this, as we'll see, is that the use of a cascade of successive Bloom filters elegantly, completely solves the false positive problem that's inherently created by the Bloom filter's efficiency. And as it turns out, this Bloom filter technology comes in very handy in computer science, and it's everywhere without us really being aware of it. The servers of the massive content delivery network Akamai use Bloom filters to prevent the so-called one-hit wonders from wasting their cache space. One-hit wonders are web objects requested by users only once. After Akamai discovered that these one-hit wonders were needlessly tying up nearly 3/4 of their entire caching infrastructure, they placed Bloom filters in front of their cache to detect a second request for the same object. Only if an object was requested a second time would they bother to save that in the cache. Google's Big Table, Apache's HBase and Cassandra, CiliaDB, and PostgreSQL all employ Bloom filters to bypass, get this, to bypass disk lookups for non-existent rows or columns. That is, the Bloom filter can definitely say something's not there. It's not so good about saying for sure it is there. That is just a simple Bloom filter. We'll see how that's been fixed. But this is useful because quickly knowing when something is not something is for sure not in a database significantly increases the system's overall performance.
Well, and you do that all the time. I do that all the time in coding because I want to know, should I add this to a list? I don't want to duplicate it. Just like the caching problem. It's the same thing, right?
Right.
I don't want to duplicate it, so I'll just say, is it here yet? No, it's not. Good. I'll put it in there.
Yep. I think it's going to come in handy. And it might say it is when it's not.
Right. I understand.
But that's better, getting a no most of the time.
Right.
Well, actually, if you ever get a no, it's correct.
No is reliable. It's the yes that's not.
Correct. Exactly.
Yeah.
And we're going to see exactly why that's the case here in a second. Also, Google's Chrome browser used a Bloom filter to identify potentially malicious URLs. Every URL was first checked against a local Bloom filter, and only if the filter returned a positive result was a full check then made of the URL. That's how Google handled the false positive problem.
Saves
Microsoft's
so much time.
Bing, and yes, I really do mean Bing and not Edge, uses multi-level hierarchical Bloom filters for its search index, which is known as Bitfunnel. Even Bitcoin once used Bloom filters to speed up wallet synchronization until some privacy vulnerabilities with the implementation were discovered. Though it wasn't the filter's fault, it was the implementation. And the website Medium uses Bloom filters to avoid recommending articles a user has previously read. Ethereum uses Bloom filters to quickly locate logs on the Ethereum blockchain. So, my point is, this is a well understood, very powerful technology that everybody's going to understand by the time we're done. And we don't really care about Akamai, Big Table, HBase, Cassandra, PostgreSQL, Bing, Bitcoin, Ethereum, or Medium, but we do care about Mozilla and Firefox, and about the fact that Firefox has always appeared to be leading the pack when it comes to actually protecting their users from revoked certificates. As we've all now seen, the other browsers, most notably Chrome, just pay empty lip service to revocation. They've said they do it, and they weren't, as I showed 10 years ago. I should note, though, that Vivaldi is also a browser whose in its default settings is also properly doing revocation, I'm sure using OCSP at the moment, the way Firefox does. And as we know, there's a bit of a problem with that. Actually, I'm going to get to that in 1 second here. So, what do we know about Mozilla's plans for next generation CRL, Certificate Revocation List-Based Revocation? 4.5 years ago, in January of 2020, Mozilla's blog posting was titled Introducing CRLite, CRLITE. They said all of the web PKI's revocations compressed. And they wrote, CRLite is a technology proposed by a group of researchers at the IEEE Symposium on Security and Privacy 2017 that compresses revocation information so effectively that 300 megabytes of revocation data can become 1 megabyte. It accomplishes this by combining certificate transparency data and internet scan results with cascading Bloom filters.
Well, there you have it.
Building a data structure that is reliable, easy to verify, and easy to update. They said since December, so that would have been 2019 December, Firefox Nightly has been shipping with CRLite, collecting telemetry on its effectiveness and speed. As can be imagined, replacing a network round trip with local lookups makes for a substantial performance improvement, meaning Firefox is not needing to do any querying of OCSP or a certificate authority's certificate revocation list. It's able to do it locally. They said, although not all updates are currently delivered to clients, they've been doing this for 4.5 years. Okay, so, and as we know, since the CA Browser Forums members almost unanimously voted to drop use of OCSP in favor of requiring a return to the original certificate revocation list approach, we were wondering how does that make any sense? Revocation lists were no better and arguably worse in some ways. So before we dig into what Bloom filters are and how they work, let's take a moment to understand Mozilla's position, which is driving this on OCSP and CRLs. In that January of 2020 posting, they wrote, the design of the web's public key infrastructure, PKI, included the idea that website certificates, I should mention, something new is mentioned here that had never occurred to me before. They said, included the idea that website certificates would be revocable to indicate that they are no longer safe to trust, perhaps because the server they were using was being decommissioned, or there had been a security incident. In practice, this has been more of an aspiration as the imagined mechanisms showed their shortcomings. In other words, we'd like to know if certificates have been revoked, but we just can't figure out how. So they said, certificate revocation lists quickly became large and contained mostly irrelevant data, so web browsers stopped downloading them. The Online Certificate Status Protocol, OCSP, was unreliable, so web browsers had to assume if it didn't work that the website was still valid, as we talked about, failing open. They said since revocation is still critical for protecting users, browsers built administratively managed centralized revocation lists. Firefox's OneCRL, combined with safe browsing URL-specific warnings, provide the tools needed to handle major security incidents, but opinions differ on what to do about finer-grained revocation needs and the role of OCSP. And as we know, although they didn't mention it here, Chrome was, said, oh yeah, we have CRL sets. We're all covered. It's like, yeah, but they don't work. We proved it 10 years ago. So they said much has been written on the subject of OCSP reliability. And while reliability has definitely improved in recent years, they said per Firefox telemetry for failure rate, it still suffers under less than perfect network conditions. Here it is. Even among our beta population, which historically has above average connectivity, over 7% of OCSP checks time out today. So 7% of OCSP, you just don't get a response from whomever you are asking. They said, because of this, it's impractical to require OCSP to succeed for a connection to be secure. And in turn, an adversarial monster in the middle can simply block OCSP to achieve their ends. Mozilla has been making improvements in this realm for some time, implementing OCSP must staple, which was designed as a solution to this problem, while continuing to use online status checks whenever a server fails to staple a response. We've also made Firefox bypass revocation information for short-lived certificates. However, despite improvements in automation, such short-lived certificates still make up a very small portion of the web PKI, because the majority of certificates are long-lived. And I should just mention here that when they talk about short-lived, they're talking about hours or days, not months. Thus, they consider Let's Encrypt's 90-day certs to be long-lived, as they should, because that's now the majority of the web. And what Mozilla says next is quite interesting. It's something we've never considered before. They wrote, "The ideal in question is whether a certificate authority's revocation should be directly relied upon by end users." What? They said, there are legitimate concerns that respecting CA revocations could be a path to enabling CAs to censor websites. This would be particularly troubling in the event of increased consolidation in this certificate authority market. However, at present, if one certificate authority were to engage in censorship, the website operator could go to a different certificate authority.
They would just route around it.
Yeah. And they said if censorship concerns do bear out, then Mozilla has the option to use its root store policy to influence the situation, is the way they put it, in accordance with our manifesto, they wrote. So that's quite interesting. They must not be talking about typical certificate authorities in the U.S., but perhaps CAs located in repressive governments, which might be forced to revoke the certificates of websites whose certificates had been issued by them, which the government later no longer approves of. And then I assume that since Mozilla would certainly disapprove of certificate authorities being used as censorship enforcement, that's where Mozilla's root store policy would come in, with them completely withdrawing all trust from any such CA's signatures, much as the industry recently did with Entrust. And then they finish up saying, legitimate revocations are either done by issuing the certificate authority or by the issuing certificate authority because of a security incident or policy violation, or they're done on behalf of the certificate's owner for their own purposes. The intention becomes codified to render the certificate unusable, perhaps due to key compromise or service provider outage, or as was done in the wake of Heartbleed. Choosing specific revocations to honor while refusing others dismisses the intentions of all left-behind revocation attempts. For Mozilla, it violates principle number 6 of our manifesto, limiting participation in the web PKI security model. In other words, as I said, they would be upset with any certificate authority that attempted to play games with their customers' certificates' revocation status. So they kind of like being able to decide for themselves rather than always have it be the CA. And that's one place where requiring stapling of OCSP status becomes a problem. This allows the browsers to retain more control of that. And then switching from issues of policy back to issues of technology, they said there is a cost to supporting all revocations. Checking OCSP slows down our first connection by around 130 milliseconds. It fails open if an adversary is in control of their web connection, and it periodically reveals to the certificate authority the HTTPS web host that the user is visiting. Okay, so they said, luckily, CRLite gives us the ability I guess I should just say CRLite, gives us the ability to deliver all the revocation knowledge needed to replace OCSP and do so quickly, compactly, and accurately. Can CRLite replace OCSP? Firefox Nightly users are currently only using CRLite for telemetry, but by changing the preference in some of their settings, it can be entered into enforcing mode. And they said there's not yet a mode to disable OCSP. There'll be more on that in subsequent posts. And that was 4 years ago. There certainly is, as we discussed last week, in Firefox, an OCSP setting. It's enabled by default. You can turn it off, and we see the effect of it being turned off. I've not tried, I don't think I've tried turning OCSP off and then turning on CRLite, although I'm not on Firefox Nightly, and I think it's still not everybody who's got this. It's only their beta testers who are able to play with this. Okay, so let's talk tech. We can broadly classify major cryptographic algorithms into two classes, lossy and non-lossy. All encryption is non-lossy, meaning that encrypting a source plaintext into a ciphertext does not lose any of the original's information because decryption, the reverse process, perfectly recovers the original text. By contrast, cryptographic hashing is a deliberately lossy process. And for what a hash provides, that's what we want. As we know, a hash, also known as a digest, takes an original plaintext of any size and reduces it to a single fixed-length output consisting of some number of bits. The number of bits is chosen to be high enough so that the probability of two different texts hashing to exactly the same combination of every bit is astronomically small. Now, common sense tells us that it would not be possible to take the entire text of War and Peace, hash it into a tiny 256-bit, comparatively tiny 256-bit digest, then somehow reverse that process to get the original text back. War and Peace is definitely not all in there in those 256 bits, even though every character of War and Peace has an effect upon the hash's final output. Okay, so now let's look at the design of Bloom filters, an entirely different system which, like a hash, is similarly deliberately lossy. Any Bloom filter starts with a large array of binary bits all set to 0. The optimal size of the large array is determined by many interacting factors, but for our purpose, we're going to use an array containing 1,048,576 bits. That's exactly 128 kbytes. It actually happens to be 2 to the 20th. So that's a nice number. So basically a megabit, right? 1,048,576 bits. Now imagine that we want to add an awareness of a revoked certificate to this currently empty Bloom filter. This 1 million bits, which are all initially set to 0. We need to use some fixed characteristic of the revoked certificate. All certificates contain a thumbprint. It was traditionally generated by taking the SHA-1 hash, producing 160 bits of the entire certificate, and later that's been upgraded to 256. So older certificates have 20 bytes, or as I said, 160-bit thumbprints, and newer certificates have 32 bytes or 256-bit thumbprints. But every certificate has a thumbprint. Now, one of the cool things about a cryptographically strong hash function like SHA-1 or SHA-256, which we've talked about before, is that all of the bits in the hash are equal. That is, created equal. A smaller hash can be taken simply by using some subset of the whole hash's entire value. And it doesn't matter which smaller subset is chosen. So for our example, we're going to take the lowest 20 bits of the revoked certificate's thumbprint hash. Thanks to the thumbprint being a hash, these are effectively pseudo-randomly set bits. Because 2 raised to the power of 20 is that 1,048,576, the lowest 20 bits of a thumbprint can be used as the index into our bit array. In other words, it can be used to select exactly 1 bit from our 1 megabit array. And we set that chosen bit to a 1. Okay, now let's say we add many more revoked certificates to this blossoming bloom filter. Let's say that we add a total of 100,000 revoked certificates. Since adding each certificate entails taking the lowest 20 bits of its pseudo-random but fixed thumbprint and setting the corresponding bit in the bit array to a 1, this would mean that up to 100,000 bits out of our total of 1 million would have been set after we added those 100,000 revoked certificates. I say up to 100,000, though, because there's a problem. There would be a good chance that out of those 100,000 certificates, many of the certificates could share the same lower 20 bits. No certificate is going to share its entire thumbprint, 160 bits or 256 bits. The chances of that are astronomically low. But we're deliberately taking only a piece of the whole hash, so collisions are possible. And as we know, the surprising fact is that the number of these collisions turns out to be higher than we might intuitively suspect. We've talked about the birthday paradox, which explains why the probability, in this case, of any 2 certificates sharing the same lower 20 bits is higher than we would think. So in practice, this means that fewer than 100,000 sets, bit settings will have been made changing these bits to 1 due to collisions where the bit that was set by a new certificate being added had already been set to 1 by the addition of a previous certificate. Okay, now, also note that after adding 100,000 certificates, less than 10% of our total bit space of 1 million, a little over 1 million, has been used. Bloom, to his credit, realized that this was inefficient, and he had a solution. Instead of only setting 1 single bit per certificate, let's set several. And we can do that easily by taking successive 20-bit pieces of the certificate's thumbprint and using each successive 20-bit chunk to set an additional bit. So let's set 5 bits in the 1 megabit array for every certificate we add to it. So we start again with an empty array with all of its 1,048,576 bits set to 0. We add the first certificate by taking each of 5 chunks of 20 bits. Remember, it's got 160, so we're just going to use 100 of those. We take each of 5 chunks of 20 bits from its thumbprint and using each chunk to determine which bit to set. After adding that 1 certificate, we'll almost certainly have 5 bits set. It could be that a certificate might collide with itself, though the chances are slight. So that my point being that since we're taking 5 20-bit chunks, it's like there's a 1 in a million probability that 2 of them actually would. It's lower than that, but I mean it's more probable than that some pair of them might have the same 20 bits. So it's possible, but probably 5 bits are set, which are representative of 100 bits of that certificate's thumbprint. And then, as before, we're going to add a total of 100,000 certificates. So each certificate will be setting its 5 very specific bits to a 1. Now we'll have somewhere less than half, but close to, but less than half of the array's bits set due to collisions. But we'll be very nearly at 50%, right? Because we've got 100,000 certificates. They're trying to set 5 bits each. So that would be 500,000 potential, which is half of our 1 megabyte. So about half the bits are set, a little less than half, due to collisions. And Leo, I see that you've got the cold soda can on your forehead. That's good.
So far, I'm following you, though. This is good. This is good. So
I think
we've got basically a megabit picture with 5 bits set for each certificate that tells us, really, the only thing it tells us is there's a collision. That certificate, if those 5 bits are set, is colliding with another certificate. Not that they're 100% matching.
Well, yeah, so far, but so all we're doing, basically, we're ORing ones into the bit array.
Right.
So what we have is, as you said, a picture, but we may have collisions. We haven't yet used it, but we're going to next. Let's take our last break,
I'm loving
and then
this.
I'm going to show people how we use this to determine something about a certificate.
Okay. I kind of think I know where you're going on this.
I know it's cool stuff.
It's not that It's not really complicated.
It's not really complicated.
Have we got to the cascading part yet?
No, and that's where you're really going to need 2 cans. You're going to need 2 cans of soda on your forehead.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Steve. This portion of Security Now, I love this stuff, is brought to you by our friends at ACI Learning. If you love this stuff, you're going to love ACI Learning. They're the folks behind IT Pro. We talked about IT Pro TV for years, right? Binge-worthy video on demand IT and cybersecurity training. Really, if you're listening to this show, this is the stuff you love. This is the stuff you love. And it can also be the stuff that you make a living at, right? It's a great way to make a living is stuff you love. With IT Pro, you're going to get cert ready, and getting a job in IT is really all about getting that cert, especially that first job, getting those certifications. With IT Pro, you're going to get cert ready with access to a library, and it's getting bigger all the time, 7,250 hours of absolutely current, up-to-date training in every aspect of IT. Stuff like this, stuff you're going to dig, you're going to watch, because the trainers are people working in the field with a real passion, just like Steve, a real passion for what they're teaching. And that communicates to you. It makes you excited about what you're learning. And guess what? That's a better way to learn anything. Premium training plans also include practice tests. That's the best way to take any exam, is to take the test before you take the test. This way, you know you're ready before you pay for the exams. It's a brilliant idea, and I highly recommend it. The premium training plans also offer virtual labs, and this is fantastic. It means you can set up a Windows network with servers and clients and everything and completely break it, and no big deal. You just close the tab and go on. You can do this in an HTML5 browser, but those virtual labs are a fantastic way to learn. They're also great. A lot of MSPs use them as a way to test a configuration change, to see how this stuff integrates into your existing setup, all without any risk. I just love this. IT Pro from ACI Learning. They make training fun, like this show. And you won't need the can to cool your forehead either. All training videos are produced at their studios. They have, I think, 7 studios running all day, Monday through Friday. They do it with an engaging kind of talk show format. It's truly, they call it edutaining. I think it's just really, it works because you're having fun and you're learning. And that makes a big difference. Take your IT or cyber career to the next level. By the way, yes, it's not just for starters. A lot of people who watch this show who are already in the business take these courses because it helps them get a better job, be better at their existing job, or just to expand your mind. Be bold. Train smart with ACI Learning. Want to know more? Visit go.acilearning.com/twit. Yes, of course, we have an offer code, SN100, SN100. Use that at checkout to save 30% on your first month, or if you sign up for a year, your first year of IT Pro training. That's a lot of savings, by the way. Go.acilearning.com/twit. The offer code, SN100. Thank you, ACI Learning, for providing a product every one of us can really use and get into and get a better job or get their first job in IT. Go.acilearning.com/twit. And don't forget, for 30% off, that offer code is SN100. All right, let us get back to Bloom filters. And are you ready? Because it's time to cascade.
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay.
Not yet. First, we have to see how they actually work. So we've designed a filter where 5 bits get set based on 5 pieces of information from a certificate's thumbprint, which is the hash of the certificate. And we've added 100,000 certificates, 100,000 revoked certificates to this filter. So
and I understand how this works, because if those bits are set, you can if they're set, you say that means there's a likelihood, but not a guarantee that certificate's in the megapixel. But
correct.
If it's not there, it's not there, right? It couldn't possibly exist.
That's exactly it.
Yes, that makes sense.
So let's say that our web browser receives a certificate it wishes to check. It wants to ask the question, has this certificate previously been added to this Bloom filter? To answer that question, we take the same 5 sets of 20 bits from the candidate certificate's thumbprint.
And that's a fast thing to do. That's really quick.
Yes, that's the other thing. All of this is super fast. We successively use each set of 20 bits to test each of those 5 bits in the Bloom filter. Here's what we learned from that, and think about this. If any, as you said, Leo, exactly, if any of the 5 tested bits are 0, then we absolutely positively know that the certificate in question could never have been previously added to the Bloom filter's bit array.
You could see why this would be fast. In assembly language, those compares are almost instant, right?
Yes, in fact, Intel has a single instruction for querying a bit in a large field.
Are you set?
Yeah. So if any of the 5 bits that are tested are 0, then we absolutely positively know that the certificate in question could never have been previously added to the Bloom filter's bit array. Because if it had been, then we know that all of its bits would be 1s. So if any of the 5 bits are 0, it's not revoked. The certificate is definitely not revoked. But the problem we still have, if all of the certificate's tested bits are 1s, is that we cannot be certain that this is not a good certificate whose 5 chosen bits just happen to collide with bits that were set by any of the other 100,000 revoked certificates. And remember at the top I said earlier, although false positive matches are a well-known and well-understood likelihood, false negatives are not. So in other words, a test using a Bloom filter can return either a datum may be a member of the set, or this datum is definitely not a member of the set. The definitely not a member of the set is what we get when at least one of the 5 bits are 0, since that can only happen if this certificate was never added to the filter.
This is efficient also because it cuts short the search. The minute you find the 0, you're done. You don't have to keep going.
You are indeed a coder, my friend.
And if you had fewer than 5 bits, collisions would be more likely. If you had more than 5 bits, collisions would be less likely. I guess that they figured out 5 is kind of a nice balance.
Oh, the
between
math
speed
is hair curling. It's got all kinds of calculus that you don't want to even think about. But
you can also do it by trial and error.
Given the size of the various sets,
Right.
it's possible to exactly zero in what you want.
What's optimum? Yeah.
Okay, so what do we do about this false positive problem, which is created by a Bloom filter? First, it's worth noting that many applications of Bloom filters are not sensitive to false positives. If Akamai occasionally caches a one-hit wonder file because the file's Bloom bits happen to collide with another file, who cares?
Right.
An extra file gets cached, big deal. Or if Medium is using individual per-user Bloom filters to avoid having users see the same article twice, but that occasionally misfires and shows them something they saw before, again, who cares? Or if a database mistakenly believes that a record exists and goes to look for it instead of immediately rejecting the request thanks to a Bloom filter failure, that's okay. So before we solve the problem of Bloom filter false positives, I want to clearly make the point that a simple Bloom filter that is able to almost instantly make a go, no-go determination, which never generates a false negative, but occasionally generates false positives, can still be an extremely useful tool in computer science.
Sure. You just have to use it in the appropriate place. Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. There are several important points, and you already touched on one, which are worth pausing to highlight here. The first is that in return for the Bloom filter's discrimination fuzziness, we get amazing efficiency. The hashes of 100,000 certificate thumbprints can be sorted, but they cannot be compressed because thumbprints are by definition incompressible pseudo-random data. Each modern SHA-256 thumbprint is 32 bytes, so any simple list of those 100,000 revoked certificate thumbprints would require 3.2 megabytes just to store the list. Yet our trained Bloom filter requires only 128K. So in return for some inaccuracy, we obtain a factor of just shy of 25 times compression. So it is super efficient. And then there's speed. As you said, Leo, searching a 100,000 entry sorted list is still time consuming, and more sophisticated tree structures consume more space and still take time to traverse. By comparison, consider our Bloom filter. The certificate we want to test already offers its thumbprint. We need to perform 5 tests, each one which directly tests a single bit of the Bloom array. For those who are not coders, any coder will tell you that directly addressing and testing a bit in an array is one of the fastest things a computer can do. And as I mentioned, Intel's has an instruction that it does exactly that. That's all it does. You issue the instruction, you get the result instantly. So nothing could be faster than these tests. Now consider that with the Bloom array having fewer than half of its bits set, each of these tests has a better than 50-50 chance of selecting a 0. And that the instant we hit any 0 in the array when we're doing our 5 tests, we know that this certificate being tested cannot be represented within this array. So with 5 tests, each super fast and each having a better than even chance of giving us an immediate out and go ahead, this has got to be the fastest, most efficient, and economical way of classifying a certificate as being a member of a larger set. But unlike Akamai, Medium, and the databases that can tolerate false positives, this application of Bloom filters for certificate revocation absolutely cannot tolerate any false positives. We can never tell a user that a remote server has just served them a revoked certificate when it has not. So now what do? You get extra credit if you guessed this is where the cascade enters the picture. Yes. To pull this off, it is necessary for the creator of the final CrLite Bloom filter cascade to have access to the entire real-time active certificate corpus. In other words, a record of every single unexpired certificate, both valid and revoked.
How big is that?
It's big, but we don't need it. Just the person building the filters need it.
Right.
Now, although this might appear to be a tall, if not impossible order, the PKI public key infrastructure actually already has all of this in place. All certificate authorities are required to publish every certificate they issue into a certificate transparency log. That log exists and it's available. So check this out. A first and largest Bloom filter bit array, the one we've been talking about, is first populated by adding all known revoked certificates. As we've seen, this will generate an array with lots of 1 bits set. And we know that once this has been done, any certificate that has any 0 cannot be a member of the set of all revoked certificates. We also know that each of the 5 tests has a better than even chance of returning a 0, so most good certificates will be identified almost instantly. But for this application, we must enforce a zero-tolerance policy. Every non-revoked, valid certificate in existence is then run through this first stage Bloom filter to explicitly detect every possible false positive that the first level Bloom filter produces. And what do you think we do with those? That's right. Those false positives are used to train the second level filter in the Bloom filter cascade. In other words, the first filter is trained on revoked certificates. Then all the non-revoked certificates are passed through it, and any that come out because they're valid, those represent false positives created by the first level. So those certificates are added to the second level Bloom filter to contain all of those. So this second level cascade, the second level Bloom, can be thought of sort of as a whitelist to handle the false positives which are generated by the first level Bloom filter. Thus, any certificate that is not in the first level must be valid. We know that. That's the immediate okay. Then any certificate that was identified by the first level, which we might call a candidate revoked, and is not also in the second level, must actually be revoked, since the second level was trained on valid certificates that were thought to be bad by the first level. We know that Bloom filters false positive, but they never false negative. So any certificate that the first level finds which the second level does not find must not have participated in the second level's valid certificate training. So we absolutely know that it had to have been revoked. However, there's one last bit of mind-melting logic to cover. Since Bloom filters are known to produce false positive matches, there's a chance that the second level Bloom filter might produce a false positive. That would lead it to believe that a revoked certificate that was found by the first level filter and had been found to be good by the second level filter should be trusted. So believe it or not, a third level filter is used to catch and categorize those cases that may slip through the second level filter. But that third level filter is the final stage of the Bloom filter cascade, and its decision is final. So, if the first level filter does not produce a match, we immediately know that the certificate must be valid, since that first level was trained on revoked certificates and Bloom filters never false negative. But if that first level filter does produce a match, we then test the certificate against the second level filter. If it does not produce a match, we absolutely know that the certificate must have been revoked, since the second level filter was trained on valid certificates, and again, Bloom filters never false negative. And finally, since the third level filter is again trained on revoked certificates, if it does not find a match, we absolutely know that the certificate is good, and if it does find a match, thanks to the pre-weeding out of the earlier filters, we can finally know with certainty that the certificate is a member of the revoked set and must not be trusted.
It's sufficient to do three levels.
Yes, exactly. Okay. And I should note that since the second level Bloom filter only needs to be trained on the valid certificates that mistakenly false positive match at the first level, that total number of certificates is very small, so much so that a much smaller bit array and smaller filter will suffice. And that's even more true for the third level that's only dealing with really exceptional cases. So we obtain significantly greater efficiency with successive levels of the cascade.
You don't need a megabit on level 2.
Right. Nothing
Maybe
near
half that and then half again or something like that.
And so, although this, I get it, is all a bit mind-bending.
Oh, it's super cool, though.
It is super cool. What we now have is a way of constructing an efficient means of rapidly categorizing certificates as valid or revoked. In order to do this, we need to train a trio of Bloom filters on every possible valid and revoked certificate that they might ever encounter in the wild. And that's actually not impossible. We can do it. Once this has been done, and Mozilla has been doing this now for several years, 4 years, we wind up with a small local certificate classifier that every user can efficiently run in their own browser, and it can instantly identify any revoked certificate from among millions of candidates without ever making a single error. This amazing local browser capability is supported and made possible by a massive, continuous, behind-the-scenes effort to produce and distill 4 times per day those 3 simple Bloom filter bitmaps, which are then made available to every browser over a common content delivery network. Individual Firefox browsers reach out to obtain the latest set of bitmaps every 6 hours. If or when all browsers have access to these filters, we'll finally have solved the certificate revocation problem with both low latency and total privacy, since every browser will then be empowered to make these revocation determinations locally.
So cool.
It is so cool.
And now, as an exercise for the listener, why is it that you're testing keeping track of revoked certs instead of keeping track of good certs? Should be easy to figure out. It's kind of fun. I love this.
Isn't
I bet
cool?
you it'll be an advent of code this December. He's very timely with his algorithms.
And it's such a cool technique to use in order to classify something. And the fact that most things are going to immediately reject the top level Bloom will immediately reject most good, valid certs. Only where there are collisions do you then need to train the second one to on the valid certs that are known to collide? And it's elegant, and I'm impressed. I mean, to me, it feels like Mozilla is out there paving the way for all the other browsers to steal it, like steal the cool tech that they come up with. And then, I mean, because, this is all just going to get copied by everybody else.
Yeah. Well, as it should be. This is a great replacement for OCSP. This is it.
I mean, it is it. The problem is, as we know, Mozilla's endangered. Firefox is endangered.
Yeah.
Because...
Yeah, but I could see Google adopting this pretty quickly.
Oh,
here. Yeah. I mean, this seems like a very clever, and it's nice because all the heavy calculation, which is calculating the hashes, is done on server side. They just push these small bitmaps. There are maybe a megabit is what, 1K? It's 128K. So you're throwing, every 6 hours, 156K or something. It's nothing. It's nothing.
Right. And
brilliant.
Yeah.
And instantaneous results.
Yep.
Now, I still have to understand why you only need 3 layers to guarantee. You're doing 20.
The math is there, and it turns out that you can show that the first filter will have resolved everything that the third one would.
Got it.
So
now it's a loop.
all the mistakes are taken out. Yeah.
Very interesting. I will read up on this, and it's and Professor Bloom, if you thought this all up.
1970.
Many years ago.
I was a freshman in high school, and he's like, if you had a lot of bits and you needed to get them straightened out, this is what you're going to do.
I want you to someday, when we've got some time and there's no security issues to talk about, do the Dijkstra algorithm, Edgar Dijkstra's search algorithm. I bet you could explain that pretty clearly. That's fun. Really good stuff. This is why we love Steve, right? Aren't you glad you listened to this episode? And if it's all a mishmash in your mind, go listen again. It'll come clear. And by doing so, you're building brain cells. You're making yourself smarter.
You're having much less room for trivia.
I have no idea who Jason Momoa is married to or not. It's not in my head because I got Bloom filters.
Like I said, you want to terminate an annoying conversation over at a cocktail party, bring out the Bloom filter.
But I have to say, if the person you're talking to says, "Oh, that's interesting," you got to keep her. Right? Now you know. Now you got something. Somebody you're going to want to talk to some more.
That might be a good first date question, but maybe not.
No, it's not.
Maybe save that for later.
Steve Gibson's at grc.com. The Gibson Research Corporation. His bread and butter is there too. Of course, SpinRite, the world's best mass storage performance enhancer, maintenance utility, and even recovery utility. 6.1 is the current version, even better than ever, just brand new. Go get it at grc.com. It's what keeps Steve in ham sandwiches. So get yourself a copy and get one for your friends too. He also has a lot of freebies, including ValiDrive. What's that new one? I can never remember the name.
Is Boot Secure?
It's because it feels like it's a caveman. Is Boot Secure? But it's a great little tool. He writes these all in assembly language. They're about this big. You download them in seconds, and they do amazing things. So it's all at grc.com, as well as Shields Up, which anytime I put a new router online, I run Shields Up to make sure it's doing the right thing. grc.com. While you're there, you can also get a copy of the show. Steve maintains the full, as he mentioned, the full archive going back to episode 1. He has, for every one of those, a 64 kilobit audio version. That's the high quality MP3, and a 16 kilobit. Do you have all of them in 16? Probably not.
Everything.
Really?
Everything.
So that's for the bandwidth impaired. That's a nice small download. A little scratchy, but fine. Also, he's got the even smallest version of this, which is the transcripts written by Elaine Ferris. She does a great job. Take a couple of days to come out because she's actually doing it by hand. All of that is at grc.com. We have audio and video at our website, twit.tv/SN. And we also go back to episode 1. We didn't do video for the first couple of hundred episodes, because Steve said, why would anybody want to see us? But I convinced him. And now the stash lives on. twit.tv/SN. You can watch us do the show live, and I think a lot of people do because they want to participate in our chat rooms. We use chat on Discord, Twitch, and YouTube. Actually, X.com, Facebook, and LinkedIn also have chat. So you can interact with us as we're doing the shows every Tuesday right after MacBreak Weekly. That's usually around 1:30 p.m. Pacific, 4:30 Eastern, 20:30 UTC. And then the streams, as I said, are everywhere. twit.tv/SN will have a list of all stream locales. We will be back next Tuesday for another gripping edition.
September. And we have you how many more weeks?
I'll be here next week, and then I'm going to be out for 2 weeks.
Okay, cool.
And Michael will
next week.
take over. Yeah, but I'll see you next week. Thank you, Steve. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Security now.